Well, we're one game out from the completion of the 2022 Rugby League World Cup with what promises to be an enthralling and historic final between the Australian Kangaroos and Toa Samoa still to come. But while there are a lot of questions still to be asked, the one that we're asking is this World Cup final a make or break occasion for Kangaroos coach Mal Meninga? Now, few people could argue that Meninga has been one of the most successful representative coaches in the history of rugby league. Not just for the success that he's enjoyed since he came on board as Kangaroos coach, but of course for the success that Queensland enjoyed when he was coaching their dominant side. Critics of Meninga, however, will argue that it's because of the individual talents that he's had at his disposal rather than his own coaching abilities that he's enjoyed such success. And when you look at that Queensland side that included the likes of Billy Slater, Cooper Cronk, Cameron Smith and Jonathan Thurston amongst a bunch of others, it's not an unfair point to make. But this World Cup, it feels like people are getting a bit frustrated with the formerly beloved national team coach. The constant uncertainty over team selections doesn't reek of someone playing mind games. It's kind of given the air of someone who just can't seem to make a decision, which is not what you want at the highest level in a coaching position like that. And then there's the noted inability to attract players like Joseph Suali'i. Mal Meninga, of course, went on radio to express how he thought that Suali'i was a prime candidate for greatness in the Australian side, and within days Suali'i had made his decision to represent Samoa instead. Now, that's not to say that the two things are related. That decision was likely to be made anyway, but it just seemed like terrible timing given that Meninga had come out days before saying that he was a shoo-in for the Australian side. Then there's the numbering fiasco. Say what you will about the reasons and the irrelevance or relevance of it. It's been a freaking nightmare for those of us who have to compile team lists, or for commentators who don't know, who aren't as familiar with the side and are trying to watch them on the field. The numbers make no sense to those of us who are familiar with decades and decades of entrenched numbers defining positions on a rugby league field. It was ridiculous and totally unnecessary, regardless of the rationale that Meninga provided. Things are unlikely to change if Australia wins the final, and that's not unlikely. They are the favourites, and they should be after being the most consistent side throughout the tournament. But once again, it's a question of just how influential Meninga was on that versus the individual talents that he's had at his disposal. Would a loss in the World Cup final finally be the end of Mal Meninga's tenure as Kangaroos coach? I mean, who's going to take over instead? There don't seem to be that many candidates who are obvious. Should a loss force Mal Meninga out of the role? I'm not entirely sure. And it's hard to tell because international football has been so infrequent over the last few years dealing with the COVID pandemic. It's hard to know just how much of an impact the COVID pandemic and this massive gap in the history of international football has had on the ability of the national team to gel, not just under Meninga's tutelage, but in general. But it's safe to say that should Australia come away with a loss against Samoa, we'll all be celebrating the historic achievement, but Mal Meninga will certainly be feeling the pressure.